Cool. And I shall remember to hit record at the appropriate moment, which will be 3:03, when I begin presenting. This is one of the drier of topics. Hopefully not too dry. Hopefully we get a really good... Hopefully there's students that are just jazzed about artist statements and they see the heading and they're just like, yes, artist statements and a recap. It's exactly what I need. Because hopefully there are students that need a few little hacks about the artist statement. Hopefully there's not, actually. Hopefully that students know everything about the artist statement and we can determine that this actually doesn't result in any development because they're already amazing at it. But it may not necessarily do such a thing. Charles, can you just, I'm just going to play a video and can you just tell me if the sound sounds kind of shit or if it sounds kind of great?
Posted on Instagram. Hello, selfie. I don't trust.
Does that sound okay, Charles? Cool, all right. I'm always worried that it's just capturing through the laptop microphone and actually it's not a very enjoyable listening experience. But if it sounds like it's coming through like normal, then that's good. We can use it. Ah, interesting. Yes, good idea. Actually, Charles, just before I hit record, can I get your sense of the video sound if I display it this way? Just tell me if the sound is kind of more through the speaker or less through the speaker. Like if it's just a clear. Anyway, Charles, if you could just give me a heads up text if that's good, if that's better, at all better than the sound before. Otherwise, I'm just going to start recording now because we're going to come back to that video later on. Sounds better that way. Thanks, Charles. All right. Wow. I've just hit record. It's week 6. We're almost halfway through. Oh, now it's in stereo. We're almost halfway through the semester. This is like the last hurdle before we can declare ourselves halfway through the semester. And then we've covered a range of things. We've covered how to judge art. We've covered various elements of art. And hopefully by now you've got a little bit of a language around, some functions in P5 that you can use, and then kind of how you can convey some kind of meaning through them, or how you can use them in a way that can be engaging to a viewer. Okay, so that's great, and you've heard me talk about art a lot, but in the end, you're going to make something, and hopefully what you make is actually this weird thing that is not immediately obvious to the viewer about what it is or what its value is. And maybe it has a range of different kind of things going on with what it does, or maybe it's just so delightfully baffling what you make that the audience doesn't quite comprehend it fully. And with art, we kind of hope that the audience doesn't comprehend it fully the first time around. In fact, what a good artwork will do is kind of reward a repeated experience of that, and then that experience compounds and gets richer as a result of that. And we've looked at a couple of ways that artists nuance that, and we've looked at various elements, including color. And the more we learn about color, the more we can see into an artist's use of color, and the more we can see what kinds of layered experiences exist with that. On top of that, we've looked at how to judge art in terms of what sort of ethical standpoint is it coming from, and do we agree with that? Do we not agree with that? Does it put us in a compromised position as a viewer? Do we like it? Do we enjoy going into perverse territory, or do we enjoy sort of simulating the idea that there's a killer on the loose and it's about to kill me? We sort of tend to judge things by that ethical thing. We also judge things about, are they well made? And we also judge things about whether they're boring, interesting, beautiful, sublime, whatever. But it's not always apparent to us exactly how the artist wants us to judge it. And so we can sometimes misjudge a work, and we can sort of take the wrong message from it. Or we might wonder, and we might become curious about, okay, well, here's the various ways that I have experienced this artwork. I wonder what the artist thought, and what is it about what I'm experiencing that the artist put in. And so our artist statement is going to help a viewer to be able to identify the flavors of what we can detect in an artwork, and to be able to connect those back to the ingredients that the artists put in. So if we think about a delicious gumbo, which is a New Orleans kind of soupy, stewy thing. It's rich in flavor. And sometimes when something's so rich in flavor and the flavors sit together so nicely, they camouflage each other and it becomes kind of tricky to figure out what actually went into it. And sometimes we just want to know, because part of the experience of not knowing is confusing but delightful. But then at a certain point, it can be something that we want to anchor our view in. So the artist statement is a really important way that artists contextualize the work that they make. And hopefully by the end of this class, you all start to find resources where you can find artist statements. There's loads of them. Artist websites are a really great source, exhibition catalogs elsewhere, and hopefully you'll be able to and motivated to look at how artists talk about their own work and how they flag and identify the things that they think are most important about their work. But it must be said that there is a feeling when you write an artist statement that you're sort of betraying the work, or you're betraying yourself. And it's sort of akin to this idea that a magician never reveals their tricks. So with that, if you do a magic trick and you show someone, they are delighted, they're wowed, they're excited about it, but then actually once you tell them how the trick works, it ceases to have the impact that it's meant to have. So when someone writes a statement about their work, one of the risks is that they take the poetic experience of their work and they make it literal. And by making something literal, it becomes really dull and boring. So in writing an artist statement, it's a fine line of kind of what to include, what not to include. And for people that aren't practiced in writing artist statements, that can be a real hurdle. But artist statements are super important for any kind of art practice. So if you ever have an exhibition, you will usually be required to submit an artist statement so that the gallery can provide that for audiences, or even so that the gallery can look at a submission of an artwork that you've applied to show and make a determination about what it is that you're even kind of dealing with here and whether it's fit for the context that they're going to show it in. So how do you explain your work in a way that doesn't kill your work? And I really love Raphael Rosendahl. We've looked at Raphael Rosendahl a little bit, and his subversive approach to art making extends to this haiku, which is a sort of structure of poetry that's really simple, comes from Japan, and it's got a series of syllables that have to line up in a certain way. Explaining art is like explaining jokes. So it's a 5 by 7 syllable arrangement. And it's really interesting to see a poem that, the purpose of poetry, in a sense, is to provoke our imagination. But also the purpose of an artist statement or writing about art is somewhat to sort of demystify or it's simultaneously to mystify and demystify what we're dealing with. So there's a philosopher named Graham Harman who writes about what's called object-oriented ontology. You don't need to remember that, but he often gives this example of a comparison in which, when we compare two things together, if we do so really literally, it takes any magic away from the thing that we're talking about. But if we do so in a way that is perfectly suited, it can provoke our imagination. And what's interesting is explaining art is like explaining jokes. It doesn't explain, this poem doesn't explain what explaining art does, nor does it explain what explaining jokes do. But if we understand the effect of explaining a joke, we already understand now Raphael Rosendahl's position on what it means to explain art. It's a different kind of metaphor than if we said explaining jokes is like explaining art. Maybe you've never had to explain art before, or maybe you don't really care about it. So the comparison of explaining jokes to explaining art might be unfamiliar. But with this example, we know exactly what Raphael Rosendahl is talking about, and it's a real problem. So how should an artist explain art? One of the most mysterious of artists is Leonardo da Vinci, who is credited as an inventor of many modern sort of contraptions like helicopters and flying machines. There's a lot of mystification around Da Vinci as well. We've seen books by Dan Brown around the Da Vinci Code and how Da Vinci sort of layers these various different motifs and symbols into his work to sort of hide the Illuminati. There's all these fictions around this. Enter the internet and you probably find even more. And then someone like Da Vinci, who is so prolific and made so many drawings and designs, you would think wouldn't have time to make artist statements and write things about the works that he made. And maybe he didn't write an artist statement about the Last Supper, but what we know that he did was he wrote a treatise on painting. And a treatise on painting is essentially Da Vinci giving us a sense of what he believes a painter should do and what he believes art is. And so in a sense, it is a window into his making of the Last Supper. So if Da Vinci can do it, we can do it. I mean, hands down. I guess without being glib, what I'm really saying is that we have an artist who is shrouded in mystery, but has actually left plenty of textual source material for us to understand what he wrote, what he was up to and what he believed in as an artist. And I'm aware that the treatise on painting was produced in 1651. It was published in 1651, and Da Vinci was not alive. He had died 132 years prior in 1519. But it was with the introduction of the printing press that then enabled artists' voices to get out and enabled audiences to start to understand, as well as art historians, what was the thinking behind someone like this. So I'll put a little link here where it's a HTML version of Da Vinci's treatise on painting, and you can have a look at all the different things that he wrote. These are all beliefs about that Da Vinci had about the things that he painted and the kinds of works, the kinds of subject matter that he was interested in, and things that he had noticed. And these are all really useful things that you could use in an artist statement about a work. If you were making a work about a human figure and you were really interested in human figure, a sentence like, "The joints of the fingers appear larger on all sides when they bend. The more they bend, the larger they appear. The contrary is the case when straight. It is the same in toes, and it will be more perceptible in proportion to their fleshiness. I have tried to execute this in my artwork that does this, that, or the other." So we can kind of take little quotes from Da Vinci if we wanted to and pretend that they were an artist statement. And I didn't realize, as Benedict Cusack has mentioned, that apparently Sean McAuliffe's artist statement each week for the Mad as Hell program, is that like a skit that he does every week. El Greco Tunis, plan to steal 500 billion from corrupt business, Tony Idris Elba. I'll have to look into that. I don't know what the hell that is. That's fun, and it's artist statement related. P.S. That isn't a haiku. Yes, sorry about my lack of expertise on haikus. I appreciate and understand where you're coming from. Albrecht Dürer is another Renaissance artist living from 1471 to 1528, and produced this engraving in 1514, certainly well into his life as an artist. He produced numerous engravings which, like a printing press, involve a set of mechanical production and reproduction that occurred in that time. And he too produced books that posthumously, about 10 years after his death, were finally printed, but which he would have been working on throughout his life for someone to then take over to typeset and produce the documentation that's to produce the plates and then to print this off. And this book is called The Symmetry of the Human Body, and this is Albrecht Dürer's kind of manual, I guess, of how one should see the human figure, and how we can, how an artist could take this knowledge and then apply it in their own studio. So artists' writings are not just about limited to the artist statement, but they're also very insightful around all of the subject matters that they that go into what they make. So that's part of the importance of the artist statement, is to contextualize and show the audience more. What's behind the work? How do we go further? Because we need to remember that a good artwork provokes curiosity within its audience. And so if there's somewhere for that curiosity to be directed, then that's going to be a real benefit to that viewing experience. Okay, so you're not going to be writing a treatise, you're not going to be writing a how-to manual for someone else making this, to make your work or to make work like you. In fact, how your work's going to be graded is everyone's going to see under the hood, and everyone's going to see all the functions and all the data that you use. So in a sense, we get the manual. But what we don't necessarily get is the treatise, which tells us what you believe is important in making a work of art. And that's what's really important to us, because art is about value. It's about, an artwork is called an artwork more than an object, because when we call it an artwork, we ascribe value to it. And if we are saying that something is valuable, there is a belief system that exists behind that. And that belief system, a little context around that can help illuminate that for the viewer and the end assessor of your work too. So by telling us what you think is valuable in your artist statement, you make it easier for your tutors to give you more marks, so long as it connects to the work in some identifiable way. So we just talked a bit about some Renaissance painters and drawers who made prolific use of treatises and manuals of art making. This is Ad Reinhardt, his abstract painting from about 1951 to 1952. Ad Reinhardt is known as abstract expressionist, or he fits within that school of abstract expressionism from the post-war period, which is the same kind of school as Jackson Pollock. However, Jackson Pollock's work looks dramatically different to us. But Ad Reinhardt, like many artists currently living and living in the 1950s as well, had a day job. And that day job was as a cartoonist. So he had these two parallel lives. And he would make newspaper cartoons for a publication called PM, which I guess was an evening sort of standard post. And he has this great cartoon, which I feel like is this fantastic interface for him as an artist statement, in which he's putting forward a position that the criticality of a viewer looking at an abstract artwork is ludicrous and ridiculous. And probably having attended many exhibition openings or experiencing his own exhibition openings where the onlooker will gawk and think, what does this represent, blah, blah, blah. He's putting it back on the viewer. And so we can sort of take a rhetoric, we can sort of understand a rhetoric behind Ad Reinhardt's work around his values and around his beliefs about how art should be engaged and what is the relationship to the beholder. And I love this because I kind of feel like this is a bit of an artist statement by cartoon. And so that's we'll get into a little bit why I think that's super important. But I guess as a shorthand, one thing to consider is using these kinds of ideas to clarify your thinking around what is important in visual art. So, for example, this is a cartoon looking at that dynamic between beholder and artwork. And this is a very particular take on that relationship that Reinhardt has put forward that tells us about his values. If you were to draw a cartoon about someone looking at an artwork, how would that look? What message would you want to say in a sort of silly throwaway cartoon that's not necessarily like a quote unquote work of art, but is just a little sort of flippant message? And if you make your own cartoon, if you do that right after this lecture, it'd be really interesting to see what does that say about what you think art is and can do in the world. So artists regularly write about art. We've looked at treatises, we've looked at manuals. If you were to become a professional artist and you have an exhibition, you're going to be writing press releases. They're totally a drag, or at least they feel like a drag, because you're kind of trying to persuade someone of something to give you a bit of airtime, or to even just give you an exhibition. So sometimes they can feel a little demoralizing. But the one that doesn't feel very demoralizing is the manifesto. And the manifesto is this example of where an artist gets on a high horse and they say things like, academic painting is dead. The futurist movement would say, we don't care about the past. We don't care about, nice painting. We care about ugliness. We care about technology. We care about force. We care about violence. We love violence. Bring on violence. And actually, their position was very in line with the fascist movement in Italy in the early 20th century. And so their really strong and provocative language cut through a lot of the messaging, but also sat with a lot of the turmoil that was going on. But then it's not just the futurists that wrote manifestos. Almost every art movement that we can call an ism had a manifesto. Dadaism, we looked at Marcel Duchamp and his urinal. Part of the Dada manifesto was, we believe in no theory. And so there's a point of view that sort of encompasses what that movement believes in. And you all sort of exist within a sort of network of values around where art sits and what it can do and should do. And so mapping out what you think in the most provocative language possible, what you stand for, what you love, what you hate, and as you write that down, you can start to compile a manifesto, which can then be a really good reference guide for when you go and write an artist statement. Okay, so artist statements. That's what we're here for. Writing about art in a very particular way. But there's no formula to writing an artist statement, but they do a few certain things. They help you to build the audience relationship to the artwork. So maybe you're Ad Reinhardt and you're really frustrated that someone's coming to your work and dismissing it or laughing at it or gawking at it. Well, one thing that he's done to help build the relationship between the audience and the work is he's created a secondary reason for an artist to do a double take on the work. He sort of said, if you don't think this represents something, what do you represent? And it forces the viewer to reflect on their own behavior in the world and think about how they can approach an artwork more generously. So that is kind of the impact of a cartoon like that. And so anything that you can say in an artist statement that helps someone to not dismiss your artwork, that's a big part of what an artist statement is. It can also indicate how to look at your art. So maybe your work doesn't look like other people's works, right? Maybe you're programming and maybe you're making shapes, but those shapes don't look like a Casey Rees sketch. And maybe you've got a very subversive, a very strange way of using form, and you think that your audience isn't really going to be across those idiosyncrasies. Well, you can sort of direct through your artist statement what you think are the salient things that an audience member should pay attention to. What are the most important things? Maybe it's about blobs and like you're really into blobs and you want to foreground that blobbiness is a big part of what you're doing. And maybe you've like calculated mathematically 25 different models of blob calculus that the viewer is not going to necessarily understand by looking at it. They might just see a whole range of blobs. But then you can say, in producing this work, I got out my calculator and identified 25 blobs and used calculus mathematics from my training as a mathematician or computer science to map these different kinds of blobs, and now they're different kinds of blobs. And so all of a sudden the audience knows that there's more to it than maybe they first judged. Yeah, me too, Charles. Me too. Why did you make it? Like, so for a university assessment, a lot of the time the answer to why did you make it is going to be I had an assignment and I had to do it. Try and think of something. You could have made anything, but you actually made this. So what is it about, what is it about you? What is it about your approach to the technology? Even if it's, I only turned up to one class, it was the class where I put a circle on the internet, and so I knew I had this like circle thing, so I thought I'd push the circle as far as I could put it, and so that led to this, that led to that, blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's the reason, and that's okay. You don't get marked down. You get marked for the assessment item. You don't get marked down because you offend the lecturer for not turning up to the labs or the classes. How did it come about? What sort of thinking was behind it? What kind of ideas have you been preoccupied with? Maybe you're like me and you listen to too much Daft Punk and you just think about Daft Punk too much, and so everything that you do ends up looking like Daft Punk. That's okay. And how does it connect to the broader world? So maybe there's, maybe you can't see the connection to the broader world, but you need to think about it, because we are immersed in the broader world, and everything that we do is fed in, whether it's through media or other things. We have influences, and sometimes they're musical, sometimes they're gustatory, sometimes we get inspired by food, and sometimes we just see a mountain and we think, man, mountains, yeah, they're in the real world and things influence you. So think about how they use that. And you can use these as prompts to consider when constructing your artist statement for your work. And there's a little link in here about how to write an artist statement, and I've summarized a few of those tips that I'll go through later, but have a read through the article. It's really valuable. It's really valuable in preparing a really good artist statement that can best reflect your assessment item. Okay. And the other reason I want to flag the artist statement is, now that we live in the age of social media, the Instagram caption, it's a big part of how one connects their audience to the content in the work. So if you can think about the power of the Instagram caption to kind of give a little bit of context. Here we have an Instagram caption that reads, "Small presents are the best gifts, paying attention to details." Now I know what we're talking about is an image of a woman in a hotel thing with some luxury bags, probably not a work of art. Any ideas why we would be looking at this? So this is actually an artwork. These series of works by Amalia Ullman are part of a 14-month performance on Instagram. Now, at the start of this semester, we looked at like a cup with coffee in it, with a little bit of a sort of love heart in there. And then later in that same lecture, we looked at a coffee with a very elaborate kitten made out of froth. And we determined one of these was art and one of these was not. Now here we're going to sort of think about, is this art or is this not? This is Amalia Ullman saying that she's done a 14-month performance on Instagram. And what we're seeing are quite banal images that sort of seem to be all over Instagram. There's no shortage of, the sort of designer in a fancy hotel shot with a bit of a vintage filter, the sort of humble brag of, look at me, I'm in this beautiful location, or look at me, I've got like the best tea set and I'm reading the best book. Anyone who can explain to me how we're able to interpret this as an artwork in the chat, chuck it in there. Because I've called it a work of art, and I'm not the only one who's called it a work of art. In fact, we know it's a work of art because Amalia Ullman has provided a really elaborate set of talks around why this is an artwork and what it did. So what she says is that excellences and perfections developed from a video for MoCA TV, which is the Museum of Contemporary Art, which attempted to fully immerse in screen reality by fabricating a fictional character in 3 different episodes. The idea was to bring fiction to a platform that was designed for supposedly authentic behavior, interactions and content. The interaction was to prove how easy an audience can be manipulated through the use of mainstream archetypes and characters they've seen before. The performance on Facebook combined photographs from the Instagram account, appropriated statements, status updates, music videos from YouTube. The process was slow, and repetition was key for credibility. Yeah, so Sarah's just mentioned that when she heard about this piece, and it was kind of about the fakeness of the lives on Instagram influencers. Yeah, and so there's something that happens with certain kinds of media in which by making a portrayal of something, we can be fooled into thinking that the thing is the thing that it portrays. And illusionistic painting can do that. You can think that's Trompe l'oeil painting is a sort of illusionistic painting where it's a tradition where you might actually think that the room has no ceiling and that there's clouds, or, it's aiming at that. And so what Amalia Ullman did was she started a character who was in sort of a perfect relationship, who then went through a breakup, and in the perfect relationship had all these nice things, and then went through a breakup and went through a spiral of destruction. And people following her commented on her posts, I hope you're okay, I'm really concerned about you, blah blah blah. There were images that she staged where she had pretended that she'd had cosmetic surgery, and was in bandages around her chest, and and so there was an element where people were fooled. But then 14 months later, she came out and she said, "Hey, I'm Amalia Ullman. I'm a artist, and I made this thing, and it was all fake," and produced the documentation to say that. So because it's so banal, one could just say, okay, well, maybe you were just trying to be popular on Instagram. What the artist statement does is it says, no, here is why it's an artwork, and here are all the things that I've thought about in order to make this aesthetically interesting and an extraordinary / unique experience. Li Mingwei, The Mending Project. So this is a work that was present at the Museum of Contemporary Art. I think it also featured at the Venice Biennale. It's gone around the world. And what it is this is Li Mingwei sitting across from the gentleman with the silk vest. Li in the white shirt is mending a garment that has been brought in by the other participant. And then after he mends it, he's going to put it on that stack of clothes, and the lendor is going to let that sit there for the duration of the exhibition. Is this an artwork, or is this a really bespoke but artfully delicious tailor, seamstressy, seam master? I don't know, anyway. A tailor repairing a work. What separates this from that? Well, part of what separates a project from that is this justification, this artist statement. So in the Mending Project, my interactive conceptual installation, I use very simple elements, thread, color, sewing as points of departure for gaining insight into the relationships among self, other, and immediate surroundings. It also constitutes an act of sharing between a stranger and myself. Visitors initially see a long table, 2 chairs, and a wall of colorful cone-shaped spoils of thread. During gallery hours, I'm seated at the table to which visitors can bring various damaged textile articles, choose the color of thread that they wish, and watch as I mend the article. The mended article, with thread ends still attached, is then placed on the table with previously mended items. Owners are asked to return to the gallery to collect their mended articles on the last day of the exhibition. The act of mending takes on emotional value as well. Depending on how personal the damaged item is, a favorite shirt versus an old but little used tablecloth. This emotional mending is marked by the use of thread, which is not the color of the fabric around it, and often colorfully at odds with that fabric as though to commemorate the repair. Unlike a tailor who will try to hide the fact that the fabric was once damaged, my mending is done with the idea of celebrating the repair, as if to say, something good was done here. A gift was given. This fabric is even better than before. So there's a few things happening in this artist statement, which is really valuable. On the one hand, we get a sense of what the thing is. The first sort of sentence tells us what elements exist in the work, that it is interactive, that it is an installation, and that it comprises an array of materials. Thread, color, sewing. I guess color is not a material, but the thread is. And an intention to gain insights into the relationships among self, other, and immediate surroundings. So Li Mingwei is interested in that particular thing. He's interested in gaining insight into the relationships between self, other, and immediate surroundings. So what is the limitation of self? And he's kind of using this process as a method of sort of testing that idea. But he's also talking about that it's about sharing a moment between stranger and his self. And then it goes into a bit of a description about how the user uses this interactive conceptual installation. So this could be considered what Charles told me about, which was new to me, was the idea of a user story, where you imagine what a user is going to do when they encounter your work. And by imagining that, you put yourself in the position of the user or the viewer, and you're considering what is it that is going to confuse them? What is it that they're going to want to act upon, or how are they going to know how to do what they're going to do? And so if you can create a bit of a user story or some details around that, you enable yourself to think more powerfully around the aesthetic choices that you also need to make. It talks about the particular poetic and metaphorical effect that it has, which is to say that something good was done here, a gift was given, and that this fabric is even better than before. So it's we're getting a sense of values around mending, around relationship, and around making the world a better place bit by bit, and foregrounding and the quote commemorating the repair. Now I know it's really dry for me to read out an honest statement to you, and I get why. But I think there's some clear things in here that Li Mingwei probably didn't just do at the end of making his artist statement. In fact, he would have set some things up before he even made the work to clarify his understanding about what this work was going to be. So producing an artist statement doesn't just start at the end. It doesn't just start after you finish the work. It can start before you make the work to sort of envision in a sort of written form what you think the work will be, what you think it'll do, and what you think will be interesting about it. And then as you attempt to make that, it might go in a different direction, but then certain things about your initial vision will still be there and still be meaningful. I want to talk a little bit about Miranda July, because Miranda July gives us a really interesting user story in the form of a video that she used to basically sell the work. So while Li Mingwei's intention with an artist statement was largely to contextualize the work, it was also to provoke people to come and bring their mended objects and to give them a sort of sense of why they should do that. Miranda July's artist statement gives us a different kind of sense, which is download my app. And her app was called Somebody, and it was only live for 2014 and 2015 and doesn't exist anymore. But we have some really interesting documentation through the artist statements that help us to identify what and how it worked. So Somebody, basically, this is the text. So when you download the app, you would see this screen that would give you this statement about how to use it and why to use it. When you send your friend a message through somebody, it goes not to your friend, but to the somebody user nearest to your friend. This person, likely a stranger, delivers the message verbally, acting as your stand-in. The most high-tech part of somebody is not in the phone, it's in the users who dare to deliver the message to a stranger. Half app, half human. Somebody is a far-reaching public art project that incites performance and twists our love of avatars and outsourcing. Every relationship becomes three-way. The antithesis of the utilitarian efficiency that tech promises here is finally is an app that makes us nervous, giddy, and alert to the people around us. This is a cracking artist statement because it gets us excited. The first sentence tells us what the thing does, and then it tells us how that loop gets closed. And then it tells us why it does that. There's a mention here about it's a dare. Users who dare to deliver a message to a stranger, right? So there's a sort of perversity there that sort of is encouraging a user to be brave. It incites performance, and so this is what it does. This is how it changes the world, and this is why people will understand it, because people love avatars and outsourcing. Every relationship becomes a three-way. Okay, that's a sort of utopian vision where we're no longer, it's just not you and me, it's you, me, and the other person. And now we're bigger than we were. You know, there's sort of metaphors and connotations that are playing here that make us excited about using the app and learning more about it. Here, finally, is an app that makes us nervous, giddy, and alert to the people around us. So this is really telling you the impact that this is going to have on you if you download it. On Miranda July's website, there's some really there's some other text that we can use for this, like have you found it impossible to say something face to face to someone you know, someone you loved? The words just won't come out. With new messaging service, Somebody by Miranda July could help. It's the start of, so this then goes into this film that we'll check out. And then I love this first paragraph in this explanation. Texting is tacky, calling is awkward, email is old. July is using tricks of language and rhetoric to really get you excited. These words just sound great together. This is not her first draft. She's written something and then she's reread it and she's rewritten it and she's edited it and she's turned it into something really slick, really exciting. They sound good. They feel good to say. Texting is tacky. Calling is awkward. Email is old. I love it. It's so good. And I want to show you a bit of a use case of a bit of a user study. It's a fictitious movie. Miranda July, in addition to being a app developer, she's also a filmmaker. She's made quite an acclaimed film called The Future, which is a feature-length film. She's got another one coming out this year, I think. So she's across all the requirements of being a feature film maker. And so let's just have a little squiz at one of her user studies that she's depicted in film and think about this as if it were an artist statement.
Caleb?
Yeah?
It's me, Jessica. I so totally love you. I can't, I just can't be your girlfriend anymore. I can't. It's not anything you did. You're perfect. You're perfect. I just need some space. I just need some space.
Jessica.
All right. Okay. Yeah. It's gonna be good. You're gonna be all right, man. You got this.
What are you wearing?
I'm wearing clothes, stupid.
You're wearing my jacket. That's what you're wearing.
I'm wearing my jacket
No.
that I bought.
I
but
told you that I
never-
was gonna buy that jacket. What do you mean
You think
your
you tell
jacket?
me everything?
You never
tell
I even posted it on Instagram. Hello, selfie.
I don't
Cool. So check out that video. There's a series of different user studies user stories that we get from that. And what's really useful about seeing these kinds of artist statements across different kind of media is that these can be made in a way that develop towards the making of the work, because as you write something down, or if you try and represent the thing that you're trying to make in alternate ways, you end up seeing different kinds of uses for them. For example, in making that film, the only way that film makes sense is if the app can actually do that thing, which is, oh, you could break up with somebody on behalf of somebody else, and then that's sort of an interesting dynamic and a compelling kind of story that you can tell about the thing, that what your thing does. And I want to introduce this now because we're towards the halfway mark of the semester, and eventually you're going to be dealing with a major project. There's other, assignments due before then, but in getting in the habit of sort of thinking about what is interesting to you about all the P5 functions so far is the more you map them down, and then the more you simultaneously think about what you think is valuable kind of in the world, the more you can then start to align those things together. So even if it's starting with a kind of mind map of, P5 circle functions, and then as it turns out you really love planets, and then circles and planets, and you think the cosmos is really interesting and they connect, and you didn't realize they connected until you mind mapped it, wrote it down loosely on a piece of paper. The sooner you start to work towards a artist statement, the sooner you can get a lot of clarity about what's going to be uniquely yours and what's going to be really exciting for you to work on. So by way of wrapping up, an artist statement, the things we want you to do is to tell us how to get the most out of it. Okay? So we come to an artwork, and really good artworks we don't exhaust them immediately. So tell us how to get more out of it than we're already getting. Tell us what you think is interesting about it. Okay, so what you think is interesting might not necessarily be what I think is interesting, but I'll find it interesting that you think the other thing is interesting. And that will help me to place more value on the other thing, and to see some of the other decisions that you've made in context to the fact that you thought it was interesting. And tell us about the journey or process that you undertook to make your artwork. Okay, so it may be that you were trying to do calculus on blobs. And you were trying to do all this calculus on blobs, but it was really hard because you needed this function and that function, and this function wouldn't talk to that. And then you were writing this function and that function, and while they wouldn't talk to each other, they had this weird effect. And that weird effect was actually way more interesting than the blob thing. And so you started playing around with that effect. Okay, so just because you find, like in art, you don't have to be correct. You can find things by error, and mistakes can lead to really interesting outcomes. And that's interesting, and the journey to that is really interesting. Here's a few don'ts. Don't tell us what we can already see. Okay, so if your artwork is a picture of a red circle on a blue background, don't tell us, here is a red circle on a blue background. We can see that. Tell us more about the red circle and on the blue background that we can already see. It's not there to stand in for or to replace the work. It's there to sit beside it. And we'll be able to see lots in the sketch. So don't tell us that you used the circle function or the ellipse function. Don't tell us that you used a randomizer. We can see that. But tell us why you used the randomizer. Tell us how you used the randomizer and what you wanted to get out of it. And definitely don't say stuff just so that you sound arty. A lot of people do it. I do it. I especially do it when I'm in a corner. Try and hide that I don't know what I'm talking about by using magniloquent linguistical tactical maneuvers to basically try and camouflage that I don't really know what I'm talking about. Catch yourself doing that and edit it. So although we said that there's no perfect formula, there are formulae that can help you get it started. And here's a generic one. Paragraph 1 or even sentence 1 of your artist statement should give us a broad overview of your ideas. Tell us what is the sort of scope of the world that you've developed here. Then give us an explanation of the processes and functions. And functions, apparently there's more than one types of functions. My typo, my bad. An explanation of the processes and functions you used. And in your final paragraph, a description of your personal philosophies explored by the work. How do the broad overviews of your ideas and the processes and functions that you used, how do they connect? And then what is the result? And then what is the implication of all of that now that you can see it all there together? And that's going to be really important for you to consider and to consider early. Now, I talked about this article, How to Write an Artist Statement. Please do read it. Just some summary takeaways are some prompts that come up in that article to help you out. So if you're stuck and all the other prompts haven't been working, try this. Write down 5 questions you'd want an interviewer to ask you and then answer those 5 questions. Describe a memory that aligns with your work. So an example of that might be, I wanted to make blobs because when I was young, I was really into SpongeBob SquarePants. And what always interested me was this character Patrick, who was simultaneously this sort of geometric thing of a star, but also this kind of a blob. And I could never wrangle it in my head about which was it. And ever since then, I've thought about blobs. When I look at clouds, I see Patrick from SpongeBob SquarePants in the sky. And I try and imagine and try and measure, how can you measure a cloud? Right, that's pretty arty and that's, but I'm talking about SpongeBob SquarePants. It matters because if you're dealing with blobs and you're doing calculus on blobs, that's a really personal memory that links to an intention that goes deep into your biography, that aligns with the thing that you've done and gives us some insight about the value of it by showing us that there's someone that really values this and has valued it for decades. So make a mind map of all your ideas, influences, and processes that have gone into your work. After this lecture, or at least over the break and into next semester, hopefully you'll be doing little sketches about what you're doing, what you're interested in making for your assignments. But don't forget to map out words, key phrases, key ideas, key concepts, key philosophies. And remember that writing a good artist statement is 1% writing and 99% editing. You'll probably only use between 30 to 50% of the writing that you do on your first draft. And once you've written it all down, it's then going to be about you stitching things together. So you'll find out that the word that you used is just a magniloquent obfuscation of an escape hatch of you trying to hide your own, simplicity. Use the simplicity, get rid of the jargon. And you'll find that most of what you do gets eroded, but is easier to understand. And so editing is where the gold is. So the earlier you get onto it, the more refined and better it's going to be in the end. So just something to think about. What do you think is the difference between a written description of the work and the artist statements about the work? Chuck something in the chat. We've got a couple of minutes because I want to see what, after having heard all of that, what you see as the key difference between a written description of the work, and an artist's statement about the work. As you're thinking about that, there's some further reading, the links to those things if you can't find them on the other slides. And chuck in any questions to the chat. And in the last couple of minutes, I'll be really keen to deal with that. Yeah, I love that example of Joaquin Phoenix's performance that turned out to be just a big sort of prank on the movie sector, or a sort of meta narrative or a meta description. I remember seeing him on Conan or Letterman or something with this like really scruffy beard. Most awkward interview I've ever seen. Thanks for the answer, Ben. I think an artist statement does exactly work. I like to think about it, it amplifies the work, so it can be an amplifier of the content of the work. So definitely it enhances the work somehow and helps you get more out of it that's not immediately obvious. Check out manifestos, check out artist statements, see how they make you excited, see which ones make you excited and which ones don't. What kinds of words are they using that excite you? The more you study other people's writing, the more you'll get better as a writer yourself. Thanks everyone for joining me on this final day of the term, with only 1 hour to spare for week 6. I appreciate your questions, comments, and contributions. Oh, before I go, a written description can be done by anyone, but the artist statement is mainly by the artists. Yes, and artist voices matter. Thanks, Janice. Well, I'm going to let you all go now. I'll send the recording to Charles, who will make it available to you all online should you want.